And let's now talk to Dr. John Kunkel, who's a senior economic advisor with the Economic Security Program at the United States Studies Center, and get some further insights into that. What's the latest you can tell us on this particular situation? Is it over for the moment? What do you think is going to happen next?
It looks like the senators obviously voted now and affirming the earlier vote in the House of Representatives earlier in the week. So that will mean the legislation will go to President Biden's desk to sign. So essentially that averts the near-term crisis. I mean, there are different questions as to what would have been the trigger on the 5th of June and whether, in a sense, the stark prospect of the US Treasury, if you like, running out of cash. And there are different views as to what that would have meant next Monday. But basically, with this agreement and this legislation, it means the issue has now been resolved, at least for the next 18 months. So it'll come back in some form in 2025, but that will be after obviously the election next year.
Look, I have to ask you this question. Most other countries don't go through this tightrope walk every couple of years. Debt crisis, is it going to happen? Is there going to be a default? Will the whole planet blow up because the US defaults on its debt? If you had to make any suggestions as to how there could be a more practical way of handling this, what would be your suggestion?
Well, look, it certainly puts on display the division and, if you like, the dysfunction of politics in Washington for the whole world to see. And how do we go from here? Look, it's very challenging because the substance of the issues are really around the scale of the US deficit. And that's essentially two issues. One is the what's called entitlement spending, which relates to things like medical insurance and pensions and things like that. And that's basically locked on a certain path. And no politician, in particular Republicans as well, actually are really keen to send a signal that they want to curb those entitlements. And then the other issue is, of course, taxation revenue. I mean, the United States, as a reserve currency and a global economic superpower, basically at the moment pays for about 80% of its government. Now, most countries can't operate on that basis. They might be able to run deficits for periods of time, but for it to be sustainable, they need to close that gap in some ways between the expenditure line and the tax revenue line. And look, to be honest, usually that relies on a combination of both, of restraining expenditure and finding areas of increased taxation. The American system finds it very hard to deal with this in a very polarized political environment. There are some ideas. I think Speaker McCarthy suggested a bipartisan commission, and they commissioned people from outside the Congress and the political system to look at the issue and come up with ideas. But frankly, it's hard to see unless the politicians are prepared to take really tough decisions and to level with people about the consequences, we're likely to stay in this cycle.
All right, Dr. Kunkel, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective.